Hi, I'm Miss Hadi from Olympian High School, and I'm going to be using the Traditions and Encounters textbook to teach you about the emergence of popular Hinduism. We'll be starting on page 225. So the first thing we need to know is emergence means coming to be. Something that's emerging is coming into being. Then we need to make sure we know what the word popular means. This isn't like Mean Girls, where one group of girls is mean to the other because they're more cool, they're more popular. Here, this means what most people believe. So if you read the specific definition, it's sort of the culture of the general public. It's what's going on that is broadly true for most of the population, not for specialists or people that are really, devout, but this is in general for most people who practice Hinduism. So you also need to know what the word Hinduism is, and I've made an entirely different video that reviews Hinduism versus Buddhism. But before I begin, I'm just going to really quickly remind you to go back to what you learned about in chapter 4 about Hinduism. But basically, you need to know that in order to see the changes. We need to know, for instance, that the Aryans came down into India during the Indo-European migrations, mixed with the Dravidians, and that's going to change their beliefs. And this earlier Aryan beliefs mixing with the Dravidian beliefs is going to give us sort of early Hinduism, which is all about performing a ton of ritual sacrifices and getting to salvation through either extreme meditation or extreme asceticism, to what we see in this chapter, which is completely different. Here you're going to see the belief that you can have salvation while still participating in society, and through your caste duties, what we'll call your dharma. And the only other thing I'm going to say before I begin is that I want you to pay attention to how imperial sponsorship affects the popularity of Hinduism and also Buddhism. By imperial sponsorship, you can hear the word empire. So it's when the empire or the government sponsors or helps provide material support in terms of paying for things that support that institutions of that faith, or somehow support that faith in the ways that helps promote the spread of the faith. So we'll begin. So just like Buddhism is going to change from early Buddhism that you're going to learn about in your book, to Buddhism where you can achieve salvation in multiple ways, Hinduism is going to have a similar sort of change. It's going to basically start to depart from the older traditions, and we'll see changes in doctrine and observances. We can see those changes in two of the most important poems in India, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. If you go to India, most people there will know what you mean when you say the Mahabharata. Not knowing about the Mahabharata is like not knowing about the Christian Bible in the West. You'd kind of be like, how do you not know what that is? So if you don't want to seem like you are ignorant amongst your Indian friends, South Asian friends, you want to make sure you remember these works, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. So these originally were secular tales, meaning they were not religious, but over time, the Brahmin priests are going to transform them to be more religious, and they'll introduce characters or emphasize characters that reflect the religious beliefs of that time. So they're really interesting to study because they show us how thinking changed over time. So what is the Mahabharata about, and what is the Ramayana about? So let's start with the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a really long epic, and it's about a war, a conflict between two groups of cousins. And one small episode of the Mahabharata is called the Bhagavad Gita, which is often abbreviated to the Gita amongst Indians, or amongst hippie yogis in San Diego, which I used to be part of that community, who study the Gita. So it's an important work because there's something that happens in the Bhagavad Gita, which is one section of the Mahabharata, which really reflects the changing doctrine of Hinduism at that time. One of the changes that you'll notice in the Mahabharata in this time period, so there were many, many versions of it, but one of the changes that you'll notice from this time period is that there's going to be an emphasis on the god Vishnu. There are three major gods in Hinduism at this time. You have Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. Vishnu being the god that is often depicted in blue or purple colored skin, black skin, richly bejeweled, usually has 4 arms. This is the preserver of the universe, representing goodness. And often he comes down to earth in an avatar or an incarnation. One of those incarnations is Krishna. We'll see Krishna in the part of the Mahabharata called the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so we see this increasing emphasis on Vishnu in this time period. That's in the Mahabharata. The other book I wanted you to know about was the Ramayana. This is a really interesting story. Again, it started off secular, but it's about this prince named Rama and his very loyal wife Sita. His wife Sita gets kidnapped, and he goes through all of these trials and tribulations to rescue her from the demon king of Ceylon, which is today called Sri Lanka. He makes an alliance with a monkey, leader of the monkeys named Hanuman. And, again, we see a reflection to making more emphasis on Vishnu, so more attention paid to the god Vishnu in this time period by making Rama an incarnation of Vishnu. Rama and Sita become sort of this idealized version of a loving couple during this time. And again, these poetic works show this increased emphasis on the importance of the god Vishnu. Another thing that reflects the changes is that small chapter of the Mahabharata called the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita was probably written down somewhere between 300 BCE and 300 CE, but it probably went through many rounds of revision, revising until it took its final form around 400 CE. In the Mahabharata, there's a man named Arjuna who's a kshatriya, which means he's a warrior. And he's really reluctant to go to war because the Mahabharata is all about a big war, and the Bhagavad Gita is one chapter in the Mahabharata. He doesn't want to go to war and kill his cousins, because remember, it's a conflict between cousins. And he's talking to his charioteer, Krishna, about not wanting to go to war. Well, it turns out Krishna is actually an incarnation of Vishnu, because remember, Vishnu is being really emphasized during this time period. And Vishnu makes a lot of interesting arguments to Arjuna about why he should go to war. One of the arguments that he makes is that it is his duty as being a member of his caste, and that not fulfilling his caste duties would be akin or like committing a sin. So this is really interesting because this reflects a major change in Hinduism, and that is a change from believing that the only way to get to salvation from the classical chapter 4 kind of Hinduism is extreme asceticism, extreme meditation to get to moksha, to one method being you can faithfully do your caste duties, and to not do them was sin-like. He also taught that when you do these duties, though, you should do them without attachment, without worrying if you're going to, like, for example, if you're a warrior, without worrying if you're going to win or lose the battle, if you're going to die or be reborn. Sorry, if you're going to die, you'll just get reborn. So again, going back to that cycle of samsara or reincarnation. There is a small section of the Bhagavad Gita that I'd like for all of the students to read, whether you're Ms. Rogerson's kids or my kids. Really important for you to read to get a sense of what the beliefs are at that time. And we might read it in class this week as well. Okay, the other thing that Krishna taught was that one of the things he had to do, that Arjuna had to do, was to devote himself fully to Krishna, which of course Krishna is an incarnation of Vishnu. And this idea of devotion, unquestioning devotion, being important to salvation becomes a big part of the more popular kind of Hinduism, ecstatic devotion. Hindu ethics were also different. The Upanishads had taught that you should renounce earthly pleasures, you should detach yourself from the world. However, in the Bhagavad Gita and which is part of the Mahabharata, you didn't have to completely go out and be an ascetic in the middle of nowhere and practice extreme yoga, extreme meditation, extreme asceticism. Instead, you could still be participating in your worldly affairs, just doing your duty with diligence. So that doesn't mean that you should be emotionally involved with doing your duty. You shouldn't expect rewards or recognition. You should do them faithfully and without attachment to outcome. By that, I mean not worrying about if you're successful or if you fail. So just doing your best by your duties. Okay, so there are 4 important Hindu ethics that we can see that become really important at this time. Dharma, which is being obedient to your religious and moral laws, fulfilling your caste duties. Artha, which is the pursuit of economic well-being. And kama, prosperity is just wealth. And kama, the enjoyment of pleasure. And here, unlike other religions, sexual pleasure is allowed, but not to be indulgent, in moderation. And of course, trying to reach salvation is called moksha. So by being a good Hindu and the proper balance of dharma, artha, and kama, you could get to moksha. Okay, so as we're seeing that this is a change. Now you could participate, lead an active life in the world, and still be a good Hindu. Whereas before, the most idealized kind of Hindu was someone who was an extreme ascetic, detached from society. And what we'll start to see by 1000 CE is a change throughout India where Hinduism displaces or takes the place of Buddhism as the most popular religion in India. So for a long, long time, Buddhism had been the most important faith in India. That was partly because of the support that it received, the imperial sponsorship of the Mauryan dynasty, and also because the Buddhist priests used to go out and seek out converts. But over time, less and less Buddhist priests were leaving the wealthy confines of the monasteries to go proselytize. Meanwhile, you see this new kind of Hinduism attracting more support, partly because of the Gupta dynasty. When the Gupta dynasty comes to power, they're going to give a lot of land to the Hindus to build temples on and support an educational system that also promotes Hinduism. So this is similar to what Ashoka of the Mauryan dynasty did with the Buddhism, but of course it's going to be with a different religion, with Hinduism. So you want to think of the turning point or the place at which the shift takes place, where it goes from India being mostly Buddhist to being mostly Hindu again, is 1000 CE. So that is when Buddhism will decline, Hinduism will increase, and a new religion, Islam, will also start to attract followers in India.